Sex with Rebecca, a show geared towards relationships and sexuality that'll help you enjoy your relationships more than you ever thought possible. Send us your difficult questions and we'll bring you expert answers unlike anywhere else. Some of the most common questions I've been getting have to do with sexual incompatibility, aka differences in how often or the type of sex one wants. So today we'll be discussing how to work around those. Joining me for that very important discussion is Carlyle Jansen, sex coach and the owner of Good For Her, one of Toronto's leading centers for sex education. Welcome, Carlyle. We're so fortunate to have you joining us tonight, someone of your caliber to talk about something so important. So welcome.
Always a pleasure to chat about sex with you.
Go figure, right? Now, how often do you get asked questions about desired differences, and what sorts of questions come up under that umbrella?
I get lots of questions. It's really, really common. Is there something wrong with me? How come I used to be interested in sex and I'm not anymore? Does it mean that we've fallen out of love? How come my husband has less desire than me? I thought it was supposed to be the other way around. What do I need to do? Should I take a pill? So lots and lots of questions and misunderstandings and misinformation, I think, about what we should be expecting of ourselves.
Misunderstandings, that's really well put, because, you know, it's a desire difference. It may be even something about physicality, but we attach so much meaning to it, and that's when it can become hurtful. You don't want me, as opposed to maybe you don't want sex as much as you wanted it at one point. Let's shed some light on common reasons why different people end up in different places. So let's talk about some of that stuff. And before we go into it, of course, you know, we know that I want to mention that it's a relative thing. I don't know if you remember in Annie Hall, where Woody Allen goes to see the psychiatrist and says, we're here because she doesn't want sex at all. How often do you have it? 3 times a week. Imagine that. And then when she goes in, she says, we have it all the time. How often? 3 times a week. Can you imagine that? So of course it's a relative thing. So maybe you can sort of talk about what are the nuances and realities of what desire actually looks like.
Well, we have lots of ebbs and flows, different things in our bodies, different things in our lifetimes, stress levels at work, parenting, if we're on medications. As we age, things start to change. So there are lots of lifestyle things that affect us, lots of hormonal things that affect us. And sometimes our expectations are that we're going to be the same as we were when we first met and we first started connecting, and when we were a lot younger, and when we didn't have kids and our life was different.
Our life was different. And the interesting thing is that as is, like, we're on a bell curve, some don't want it very much, most will want it maybe a couple of times a week, some want it a lot. But when we're in that initial stage, you said when we met, we're in the limerence stage where Mother Nature wants us to mate. It's got one agenda. So it douses us with those feel-good hormones, and we kind of want to rip clothes off each other all the time. And then we go to our baseline, and all of a sudden, one partner or the other one say, what happened? Is this a bait and switch? Do you see a lot of that?
Absolutely. We see it where we don't know why it's changed. Or somebody says, like, well, I'm not interested in having sex with my partner, but this person at work, right, because it's new and exciting, I'm kind of interested in pursuing that. Does that mean I should leave? And should I start a relationship with this other person? Or that with my husband, my partner, it's just never going to be the same again, right? And so we start to see these changes and we interpret them and we think that we need to change things, as opposed to what I find is when we understand what's going on, when we understand and we give ourselves permission to not feel horny all the time, when we give ourselves permission to have the natural changes in our relationships, we can then work with that and we can have a really vibrant, hot sex life.
Absolutely.
Even if we're not craving it all the time.
Yeah, and that's why I think I'm so excited that we're doing this show today, because we're going to talk about some of the ways to do that, so we can feel that, you know, that hot and horny sex life, and it doesn't have to be all the time. And when people are looking for novelty, it doesn't have to be partner replacement therapy. It can just be finding novelty with each other. So, you know, we're talking about how we can be different. Part of it is our erotic templates, which develop when we're between 5 to 8 years of age. And most people don't realize that thing you're craving, it was established eons ago, long before your partner even met you, and they read too much into it, as it seems to be the common theme. So maybe you can talk about that rat study, because rats and humans, we're so alike when it comes to passionate things like making love and making war.
Well, we're all animals, right?
Yes.
And there happened to be a study on rats where they looked at rats who were wearing little jackets and rats who weren't wearing little jackets.
Little biker rodents.
Yeah, and they started, they connected, they were having sex, and their first sexual experiences were either with or without jackets. And what they found is that overall, the ones who wore jackets, that was what they needed in order to desire, to mount, and to ejaculate and procreate with a female rat.
Sort of like Dumbo's feather.
And so those who weren't used to wearing jackets, you put a jacket on them, you're like, what am I supposed to do? And those who were used to wearing them, when you took them off, they're like, what am I supposed to do? And so that erotic imprinting happened when they started having sex, and therefore dictated what was necessary for them to continue getting aroused and having sex and ejaculating, which is what our animal brains want us to do.
Yeah. And you know, neurons that fire together wire together. So that's when we make the connection. And you know, there was a similar study where the females were sprayed with scent of death, and rats were fine. They went there, they had a hump fest, and then the second time around they weren't sprayed, and they thought they won't be afraid now. But in fact, they had paired fear. So it doesn't even have to be an object.
Right.
It can be something else. And we've talked about there's an ebb and flow. Things change over time, and that can complicate things as well. So maybe you can comment on a couple of things. You had talked about hormones, how they change us over time, and I also want to mention the flip-flop that happens with women, where desire may not come before arousal. You may have to arouse the person before desire kicks in. Lots of women say, I don't have desire, why would I want to do that indeed? So can you maybe talk briefly about hormones and tie that piece together?
Absolutely. And so hormones are often what make us horny, but not exclusively. And they affect different genders and sexes at different times. And certainly things like pregnancy, menstruation, menopause will affect things. And I find women tend to have a lot more fluctuating, right, through different life stages. Men tend to have more of a gradual decrease as things
Towards
go
andropause,
on, right?
right,
Yeah,
right.
in terms of their desire. And certainly that will affect how regularly we feel like we want to have sex, how easy it comes to us, how easily aroused we are, how easy it is for us to orgasm. And those are really natural things. The problem also is if it doesn't work the way they expect it to, we start to panic.
And the partner starts to panic too.
And we think, what's wrong with me? How come it's not working? Am I going to ejaculate? Am I going to orgasm? Is my partner turned on?
And the performance anxiety, it takes a life of its own, which is a good segue into one area that does impact men is when they're stressed out, cortisol goes up the stress hormone. As soon as cortisol goes up, testosterone comes down, because the same mechanism that makes the two things. It can make cortisol, it can make testosterone. Testosterone comes down, there goes desire. The other thing that happens is blood vessels constrict, because they're getting you ready for fight and flight.
Right.
And if blood vessels constrict, there goes the erection. And that sort of pretty much captures the performance anxiety loop. Yep. You're worried, I hope it doesn't happen, and voila, it's going to happen. So we have lots more to discuss around this, and we're going to talk about how desire how we can work with those changes. So lots more stuff coming up. Stick around. We're going to be talking about how to work with those desire differences, and of course, a little bit of kink. Woo. Welcome back to Sex with Rebecca, geared towards making your relationships more robust than you ever thought possible. In this episode, we're discussing sexual differences with sex coach Carlyle Jansen. Between the two of us, we got you covered or uncovered, as the case may be, in every way imaginable. Now, Carlyle, during break, we're talking a little bit about a point we had raised before break, which was the flip-flop that women experience. In other words, arousal may have to come before desire. So maybe you can comment briefly on that before we actually tackle the next topic.
Yeah, well, I find that, you know, we expect that we're going to feel horny, like it's going to fall out of the sky, and then all of a sudden we're going to make a move on our partner, or stimulate ourselves, and that doesn't often happen. And so often I say to women, have you had the experience where you weren't really in the mood and your partner's approaching you and you think, okay, I'll take one for the team, and you kind of start into it, and as it gets going and there's a bit more touch and you get aroused, the desire follows and you get more aroused, and before you know it, you're like, woohoo, you know, wow, come, it's been 3 weeks since we had sex. That's a classic example of how you weren't aroused, or you didn't have desire, but once you got aroused, the desire kicked in. And once you know that, you can work with that.
Absolutely. Even Cindy Crawford says that if I waited for that, you know, for the desire to strike, it might not happen. So I just say, you know, it's been a while. I want to connect with my partner. I start to think about how I'd like to feel as opposed to how I'm feeling. And I'll either do a little bit of self-loving, nothing wrong with that, or I'll turn to my partner and say, hey, let's fool around and see where it takes us. But that can be a lot of pressure for some women, and that's when you can do a little bit of self-loving. So now let's talk about how to, you know, sort of start that conversation, because that can be a difficult conversation. There's egos involved. So can you talk about your little game that you have of bringing up the topic?
Yeah, I love to play a game called 3 Oranges and a Lemon. So 3 things that you love about your erotic connection and 1 thing you want differently. So you could say, you know, I love the way you kiss me passionately. I love the way you touch me all over my body and indulge my whole self. I love the way you go down on me, and as long as it takes for me to come. And sometimes I worry that you're not attracted to me because you don't initiate.
Lemon.
That's the lemon.
That's the lemon.
Right. And so that gives your partner 3 things that they know they can focus on, and that they know, okay, these are working. And then both of you get a way to make things a little bit better, whatever that might be. And in this case, it might be, you know, I'd like you to initiate, or I'd like to have sex more often, or whatever it happens to be. Because we always need to be working on our relationships.
Absolutely.
It can always be better.
And we talked about the ebb and flow, so we especially need to be talking about those things. I like the way you put it is, you know, the 3 oranges and the lemon, because then it's not about just asking for something outright, because then the mind goes to what, you don't enjoy sex with me, and this is just an extra. It's not, you're not trying to replace it because sex isn't good. And the mind doesn't also go to, you want me to do what? Where did you learn that?
Right. Yes.
The other thing I like is the online yes, no, maybe list, because that's a great way of saying, what do we like? What do we want more of? And sometimes it's a good inventory to see, what is it? Do I want the kisses to be softer, or do I want them to be more aggressive and wetter? So maybe you can quickly comment on the yes, no, maybe list. What's that all about?
Yeah, you can find them online, and it's basically just filling out a lot of different things that are options. So, you know, oral sex on me, oral sex on you, anal sex on me, anal sex on you, a little bit of bondage, whatever it happens to be. You can create the list, or there's lots of lists that are there, and talk about what is it that you like, what is it that you're not so into, what is it that don't turn you on but you're willing to do for your partner. That's kind of more of a maybe.
So that's the maybe.
Yeah.
And talking about what does it take to bring the maybe to the yes. But if there are any no's, I always say to couples, just get them off the list altogether. There's enough yeses and maybes. But even it's not even about an absolute yes or no. It's like, I like more of this. I like this to be gentler. I like this to be more passionate. So there's lots to work with that as well. Another thing I have couples do is I have them sit in front of each other on the bed. Hopefully they're disrobed. And I say, touch yourself the way you want your partner to be touched. And many women are shocked that the guy is doing this, he's doing this, and they had no idea. They were just kind of zooming in on certain areas, but not really taking the time to love the rest of the person. And then, you know, they're to repeat what they learned and vice versa. As a sex coach, do you have a favorite exercise you give people?
I love to do an exercise where you start with just the arm, and sometimes we can do that in the office together because we're not taking clothes off, and you ask your partner to do what you want them to do to you. So you don't assume about what your partner wants, you ask for it. And some people have a hard time even knowing what to ask for, right? That's the first learning. The second is, once you get the touch, you might say, oh, I kind of like that, but it's not exactly right. One thing you like about what your partner's doing and one thing you want differently. And that helps you to recognize that you both get to hear feedback and give feedback. And you realize it's not always a criticism, because we're afraid we're going to hurt our partner's feelings and bruise their egos if we tell them what we don't like. Say, I like this, I'd like this a little differently, and people realize, hey, that was okay, and I actually got what I wanted. And now I know what you like, because I keep asking you, and you say, oh, it's fine.
And sometimes it has to be multiple choice question too. Like if, let's say, if it has to do with oral sex, a person may not feel comfortable pleasuring their partner that way, and you don't know why. So I say, give a multiple choice list. Is it, you know, is it the taste? Is it the technique? Is it that you just are uncomfortable? Maybe something is going on with you emotionally. And when you go through the list, then the person says, now that you mentioned it, and most of those things that we can are things that we can work with.
Yeah.
So that's, again, all about the feedback. Another thing I do, I don't know if you do this, is bookmarking technique, where you take a book, you put a bookmark in what you'd like to try out, you give it to your partner. If they're a go, you go for it. Otherwise, they move the bookmark somewhere else, what they'd rather do, and then you read that. It goes back and forth. You get a gist of what the partner's looking for, and ultimately you do come across something that both parties like.
Well, and it introduces some new things to try, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes you may have tried it 10 years ago and you didn't like it then, but maybe you like it now.
But you like it now, because it does change what we crave. And sometimes we don't even know that we would like it. We may have run out of ideas and we'll go, ooh, that looks really good. I really want to try that. So that's another great way of doing it.
And even though I find even just the curiosity and the desire to try new things, I find builds that energy and that connection between two partners. Even if you find, I didn't like that so much, but it still builds the relationship.
It totally does. I believe in sex experimentation weekends, where you can play sex genies. So, you know, on Saturday I'm your sex genie, and you give me 3 wishes, and I pick the one that I'm most comfortable fulfilling for you. And Sunday you're my sex genie, and there doesn't have to be ixnay on wishing for more wishes. We can certainly do that. But that's also a great way of just taking the time to explore. And you kind of need to get away, especially if you've got little ones at home, or mother-in-law on the other side of a paper-thin wall, right? You don't want to do that. You want to be able to let go. So creating that sacred space where you can actually have fun, giving each other lots of feedback, but doing it in a nice way. One of the workshops that I do for you, I say you have to talk about it in an erotic manner. Otherwise, if you're just saying, you know, don't do this, don't do that, because it's how it's said too.
And I find that sometimes through email or text is sometimes an easier way for people to broach the subject.
There's a bit of anonymity in it.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of great ideas, things that couples can try out on their own. But we know that if there are serious issues, that may require some professional help. So when we come back, maybe we can talk about the 3 types of professionals and what are the differences. So we'll be talking about that, giving you some resources, and talking about kink a little bit. So stick around, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Sex with Rebecca, a show where we bring you expert advice on important matters to help your relationships be more intimate, exciting, and emotionally fulfilling. We've been discussing sexual incompatibility with sex coach Carlyle Jansen. And one thing that's become clear is that nothing is really black and white. So Carlyle, why don't we look at what happens in those different shades of gray, so to speak?
Lots of people like lots of different kinds of sex, and sometimes we have to explore a bit to figure out what we're interested in. And, you know, for some people, whipped cream is like really boring and basic, and for others, that's really kinky. So it all depends on what your perspective is and what your experience is.
And, you know, one person's ceiling can be another person's floor,
Absolutely.
so the sky's the limit.
Yeah.
Now, what I like is that when you talk about maybe introducing a little bit of kink, you suggest using some household items.
Absolutely.
So you brought some goodies here. Tell us
Yes.
what are some of the things that we can do with what's around the house.
And one of the ways you can start with it is you can like blindfold your partner. You can say like, don't move, right? If you move, I'm not going to continue or whatever, right? So these
That's
are
blackmail, sexual blackmail.
I know, but it's fun. As long as everybody's consensual. So these are those beads that you get at the dollar store. Lots of people get them at bachelorette parties.
Right.
These are fabulous. Just drag them all along the body. They feel great.
Texture is
along
lovely.
the inside of the thigh, dragging
yeah.
up along the genitals. Or lots of you have one of these around at home. I wouldn't recommend the one that you use for your makeup. Get a separate one or a paintbrush. Just a nice little gentle sensory kind of pleasure.
So lovely.
And some people like, you know, a little bit of contrast, so a little bit of soft and then a little bit of nails,
That's
right? Or
cool.
something a
So-
little scratchy like a fork.
So just kind of going back and forth. When you said things around the house, I wanted to be clear. It's things around other people's houses, not things around your house and mine. Because some of this stuff I don't think we'll see in most people's houses.
Yeah, well, and you can grab, you know, I often say go to the dollar store.
Right.
And see what's at the dollar store, right? You know, or feather dusters, feathers.
Totally.
Anything with any kind of sensation. A little loofah sponge that you would use in the shower can sometimes feel nice when you're not in the shower.
So it's just kind of playing with different sensations. And a lot of this stuff that you've talked about, a person may not even be aware of that they would like that this could be like a magical touch for them.
Like a scarf can go from something super soft and sensual to, let's say we want to try a little bit of bondage, but you're not really sure if you want to give up control. Grab onto it, and I'll tie it to the bedpost, and you can pull on it, you can play with it, but the moment you're uncomfortable, you can let go.
Exactly.
Right? So
Exactly.
you don't have to be fully constrained and in fully giving up your power in order to kind of try and play with it a little bit, especially if it's somebody you don't know so well.
You know what's great for that is also pantyhose because it's got the stretch thing going on.
Yes, yeah, you can play with the stretch, ties, anything like that. You just need to be really careful with any ties. You need to know how to tie things properly so that you don't cut off circulation, and have surgical scissors so that you can cut someone out if what happened to me once is I knocked over the candle and the pillow was on fire, right? You have to be able to get out quickly.
Hot sex. So we're talking about hot stuff. Things are heating up. So maybe you've got a couple of items that are not necessarily household items. Can we have some fun with those next?
Yes, absolutely. So here, let's give you, this is a little remote control bullet. You can put it in your underwear, right? And what I love about this is you can adjust this to any size of
So
person.
you can tighten it, okay.
Yep. And then we can go out to dinner and I can turn you on. I love doing it when, like, maybe you're out to dinner with coworkers or
And
your
they don't know
parents.
what's going
They don't
on.
know. And as soon as you are asked a question that you have to answer, you change the setting. So you have to
my
keep a
gosh.
straight face.
But
while
you're
something's
squirming.
going- I know, it's fun. That's the whole point of it.
Okay, invite me to your Christmas party. And I'm taking one of these. This is lovely.
Yeah.
And what I like about the bullet is it's very non-threatening. It's a
Right.
simple way to begin, just having a little bit of fun. That's really cool. What's that purple thing? It looks so cool.
This one? This is a great way to start. This is a back massager. So, you know, we talked about how you want to kind of get relaxed and get aroused before the desire kicks in. So sometimes just going for a bit of a massage. This has little roller balls in it.
good,
Isn't that
yeah.
nice?
Oh,
So if
that
you have one
feels
on
nice.
each hand, on either side of the spine, it helps to relax and helps, you know, once you get it in the more erogenous zones, can help build that desire and get things going.
And it's getting things going. And that you can pretty much control the speed and you can control the pressure too. Because ultimately it's not about finding the magical spot.
No.
It's intensity, it's speed, it's a whole lot of stuff. And you've got a tiny little,
Yes. So a little
is it a
flogger.
tickler? A little flogger.
Yeah, and so you can
Matches your
use
shirt.
this, I know, very important. You can, you know, flick it around. You can drag it along nipples, along genitals. You can give a gentle little thwack if you want. I mean, some people want something more intense, but this is a nice way to start. And even just playing with it as either soft and consensual or with a little bit of bite.
A little bit of a bite to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why those conversations, safety nets, safe words is important, because sometimes people just want nubuck or suede that makes a big noise, but there's no markings. And if that person picks up patent leather, paddle, or cat o' nine tails, they can cause some serious damage.
Well, you have to know what you're playing with. And so I always say it's playing with fire. It's fun, but you need to know what you're doing. You're not going to pick something up and just decide like, hey, let's try this thing. You have to know where you can hit, how to do it safely, what kinds of things to look out for. And just like everything.
The intensity.
Yeah,
and everything.
you need to build it up. Just like you wouldn't start with really intense oral sex when you first start touching someone.
Gently
you
build it up.
Same thing with any kind of kink. You don't all of a sudden go with a really big thwack. You build that up.
And it doesn't have to be the entire gamut, because in BDSM, BD is just the bondage and discipline, and it really isn't about pain. When you're getting into S&M, there might be more of, the endorphin rush involved, and of course, then safe words. I always tell people traffic lights, green means this is cool, you can take up the ante. Amber means I'm kind of getting close to a limit, and red means we need to stop, because no may be a very erotic word, but if you say that, and of course there has to be sobriety, because otherwise our senses change. Any other couple of pointers, because I do want to go to our homework points, but any other point on kink before we move into that?
Just that go slowly. Some people are like, oh, I want to try bondage, and I want to try dominating you, and I want to, try using this flogger, and we don't always know where our limits are. And so if this
discussing them ahead of time.
Yeah, and if this is your realm of experience and you want to try a whole bunch of things, don't do all at once. Incorporate one little thing.
Just
see how it goes. Another little thing, because you're bound to cross a boundary at one point. And that's okay, right? Once you cross a boundary. But if you cross 5, it's really hard to kind of like come back from it.
So we literally have less than a minute left. Let's give our top 3 tips. I want to say to people that just because your partner doesn't crave sex, it doesn't mean they don't want you. To minimize rejection, people can use Bonnie Barbach's system. 1 means I'm not feeling like it. 10 means gotta have it right now. Couple of yours.
Yes. So one thing is know what you want to put on the menu, right? If you're not enjoying the sex, you're not going to have a desire to go back and have more sex.
Exactly.
So know what you want, know what your turn-ons are, know what helps to get you in the mood, know what helps your partner to get in the mood.
That's a biggie.
And both of you have to initiate that, right? Don't rely on the person with a higher desire to always carry that burden. And also, and connect on a regular basis, even if it's not full-blown sex. Have little sexy texts. Have a little big, a little kiss on the way out the door. A little make-out session. Build those little erotic times, and sometimes it'll lead to more. And sometimes it won't, but you'll be more connected.
You'll be more connected. And to remove the expectation, because lots of people, they say that I don't even want to initiate anything. And of course, there comes a time when you are having issues. You either go to a sex therapist, or you go who will deal with the emotional and psychological, or sex coach like yourself who can give some additional practical hints. And sex surrogates will actually be hands-on. And to keep it sort of safe, I also say do the odd, even stuff. So, like odd weekends are yours, even weekends are mine. So, there's an ebb and flow. Final tip before we say goodbye.
Keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Yeah, when you feel like you've done it all or you're bored, sex is going to get monotonous.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Carlyle. It's been absolutely amazing. It's always a pleasure. You have so much to tell us.
It's fun. It's always fun with you.
It's always fun with you as well. At the end of the day, it's important to negotiate our differences versus ignoring sex altogether, as some couples end up doing when it becomes a bone of contention. To find out more about what that can do to a marriage, grab a copy of Michelle Weiner Davis's book, The Sex-Starved Marriage, and there's a great TED Talk along those lines as well. And for fun options to try out, grab a copy of Paul John Hyde's Guide to Getting It On. Thank you, Carlyle, for all your amazing tips. It's always a pleasure, and viewers for joining us. Be sure to tune in again next week, and don't forget to email us your questions on any and everything to do with sex and relationships. I'm Rebecca Rosenblat, your host, wishing you happy, healthy, and passionate relationships. Until next time.